The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It is the last day of March, and it's our last evening together in our ArmChair travel series. My name is Jennifer Reynolds. I'm in Tampa, Florida, and I'm so happy so many of you have joined me over this last period in a number of places that we had a chance to travel to. As part of my intro, I love to share that I was born and raised in Canada. I went to cruise ships when I was just in my early 20s, initially part of a duo juggling magic act. I did marry a juggler unicyclist from Lafayette, Louisiana, but ultimately I ran shore excursions, mostly on board cruise ships doing worldwide itineraries. Developed a pretty deep, hard love for travel, geography, history, spent a lot of years at sea. I went to Africa last year in May. I'm going to share some of those images with you. Australia last December, and within a one period year, I also hit Antarctica, so I called it my AAA. I was in Antarctica. I got home in December of last year. It was one of the most exquisite, unusual, and just mind-blowing and incredible experience that I've ever had. But I've never worked in any other industry except for ours. And it has always been unusual times for us in all of the years that I've been in this industry, and I'm sure it's going to continue to be so. And that's why those of us that are travel professionals and have always been in the business, I'm so grateful for my travel agent friends. I use a travel agent when I travel. I'm so grateful to my tour operator and business development manager friends and partners. There's a whole lot of us out here wanting to do everything that we can for our travel partners, both travel agents and our travelers. And behind all of us in the field is our amazing team. That's my guys up in Boston. And everybody has a home team someplace who's trying to make them look good. Because what we do is we travel. And we know that living is travel. We all like to eat it and breathe it and drink it and smell it and taste it. And where I grew up in Canada was only 20 minutes from Niagara Falls. When I grew up here, Niagara Falls was actually a relatively scary place. A lot of the hotels, you could rent the rooms by the hours. It's only been fairly recently that the hotels have been nicer, the casinos and the restaurants, and it's such a magnificent place to visit. But the west coast of Canada, of my home country, I sailed up into Alaska, was home ported in Vancouver. I remember Expo in '86, being in Whistler on the left-hand side with my husband on the right-hand side, doing some cliff and, what's it called? Zip lining all there. And not only are places like Whistler for skiing, but they've also got so many more activities. I worked a lot of seasons up in Alaska running shore excursions, both northbound and southbound, doing all the flights. It was really great to hear Ted talking about Alaska, and I just can't wait to get up there and see it again. And with my family, I had an opportunity to have these experiences, take my mom up to Alaska when I ran shore excursions. And we were on board Alan Marine's boat off of Sitka at that time, which was the uh, sea otter journey. And also having the opportunity to have my parents travel with me to Bermuda. My mom and dad came on board a ship with us. That's a photograph of my cruise staff uniform. And I just realized recently and got a very significant giggle that my shorts are open. The zipper on my shorts are open. But I was out dispatching tours in Bermuda. I had a chance to have these experiences with my parents because this is what lives on in our hearts. And when the chance to travel, as someone once said, when the opportunity to experience life happens, you really need to be able to say yes. Sometimes I hear people say, "Ooh, I don't like the cold." You know, you can dress for that. And for a week or two, maybe it's an experience that you may want to try. You'll often hear that Greenland and Iceland are both named incorrectly. Greenland has very little ice, and Iceland has very little green, or the opposite if you think about it. The Blue Lagoon in Iceland. Cruise ships come in here. Cruise ships circle areas like this. There were airlines that were coming in where you could stay for a couple of days. My cousin had a um, uh, local place that they stayed in, like a vacation by owner here, an Airbnb. Wonderful places. Still a little on the expensive side in Iceland now, much more reasonable than it was a number of years ago. I think one of my favorite features was knowing that they have so much thermal activity on the island in Iceland that there are pipes that go below the sidewalks, and that keeps the sidewalks ice free during the winter time. So no one needs worry about shoveling the sidewalks in front of their streets. They let Mother Nature do the dirty work for them. So many of us have done European cruises. And when I looked at Europe last night, I purposely didn't mention Turkey for a particular reason, because in a geographic boundary, Turkey is really what we're looking at here is Asia. Over to Istanbul, cruises that you can take out of Turkey, into Cappadocia here, some wonderful experiences with the dervish culture so few know about, an opportunity to do some hot air ballooning. And this is just a very quick ride out of um, out of Istanbul. Knowing that food and wine drive a lot of economies, they drive a lot of people, whether it's in Portugal or Italy, France, and Germany. There's wineries that can be visited, there's wineries that can be stayed at, there's cooking classes that can be had, there's markets that can be explored. And we often said when referring to Italy that it is so much more of a lifestyle than it really is a country. People who live in smaller accommodations than we do, who might go out on a daily basis and get their fresh fruits and fresh vegetables, particularly people in Venice, because their fridges and their accommodations would be so old. The real exotics, places like Russia, certainly with Baltic itineraries, ships going out of either Copenhagen, sometimes out of London as well, but hitting the Baltics, St. Petersburg, Moscow, Tallinn, Estonia. There's so much history with Helsinki as well, but I believe so firmly that if you're going to dabble in these parts of the world, that you need to do a little bit of your homework. If you're going to pull into St. Petersburg and look at the churches and the canals and call it the Venice of the North, you'll need to do a little bit of homework and learn about the Romanov family tree. There's lots of stuff on Netflix and lots of movies to be seen. One of the things I would always share with people, and if you ever do a group with me to Russia on one of the river cruises, I'd share with you my Romanov family tree here and say, we need to talk about this. So everybody going has a little bit of a history and a little bit of understanding of why these places are simply so magnificent. Cruise ships will go in here for 2 days, sometimes 3 days. There's land tours, sometimes the train from Helsinki. You can do an overnight train from Moscow to St. Petersburg, but visiting Peterhof, and I giggle, I've been into St. Petersburg so many times from running shore excursions and traveling with Stuart, and one of my fondest memories was when I was running shore excursions for Silver Cloud, and we lost one of our passengers who just didn't come back to the motor coach because he wandered off to go buy another container of film. Now I'm showing my age. And that was at a time when you could not leave any man behind. And we spent over an hour until we found this gentleman in the middle of Peterhof. And I don't know if I was going to kill him or his colleagues that were traveling with us, our fellow passengers, were going to kill him, but he never strayed very far again. Russia's a really neat place. It's really intense. I highly recommend a Russian river cruise, and I'd like to explore that a bit further with anyone who'd like to talk about it more. This is getting out of St. Petersburg, seeing Keezy Island, everything here being made of wood, no metal, and that includes nails. Everything is done with pieces that fit into each other. Eastern Europe is emerging as a very curious place. Former Eastern Bloc countries, Slovenia regions, Osijek the Austro-Habsburg years, although as I often say to someone, you would never come to this part of the river and worry and say, gee, I saw too much about communism or too much history, because that's what this part of the world is all about. It's these emerging people, these emerging cultures, and truly emerging places all over the world. And the goal of each of our journeys that we've had together this last dozen nights has been to explore some different parts of the world, some history, some geography, to armchair travel to places perhaps we've been to, or to places that we would like to go back to. Vietnam is one that stays very close in my heart. I had the chance to explore it on a small ship called the Clipper Odyssey with about 100 passengers aboard. At that time, we got into How Long Bay and did some kayaking. I went back another time on Silver Sea when my husband was doing some enrichment lecturing, and we dug in really deep into the history of this part of the world. And I just fell in love with the people, with the place, with the culture, with the colors. I'm by far not an expert, but I am by far a sponge when it comes to connecting with these kind of places, with experiences in the southern end of Vietnam. HCMC, going out and up the river, the Mekong River, the Delta, the very river that gives life, that gives fruit, that gives fishing, the pure endurance of people to make a living. If you don't work, you don't eat. There is nothing else to fall back on. And the tremendous history in the area, not only of Vietnam, of course, up in Cambodia, a tour through Vietnam being combined with a 7-night trip through Cambodia. This is something very, very high on my to-do list. This is an assault on your senses. It's an in touch with your spirit kind of place. Very often when people have been hurt or damaged, we seek for something that gives us a little bit more meaning and a little bit more substance. And I expect smaller experiences like this on the rivers, places like the Galapagos, like Antarctic, versus city centers are going to become front and center for all of us as we seek to travel more, as we seek to find meaning in our travel and connect with local people. Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, again, some wonderful memories many years ago from Australia and friends in Australia who spent a lot of time over here. The Irrawaddy, yes, they too have been challenged with some low levels on their rivers in the last year or two. But take a look at the style on board here. This is not ridiculously over the top expensive kind of travel. This is travel that has a lot of substance. This is travel that if you really want to make do and you really want to do this kind of travel, it can happen for you, particularly later this year, early next year. These are the kinds of experiences that I'm setting my sights on and making my list as I go back to 2000 and celebrate having been in Egypt with Stu there. Just such extraordinary experiences, having transited the canal, having gone in, experienced Egypt, also being able to go on the rivers in Egypt, and it has changed dramatically in the last number of years. A lot of cruise ships can go in and go to Alexandria. You can come in and go exclusively to Cairo. There's fabulous hotels there, Four Seasons, really high-end properties. Mina House, as well as a really great property over just down by the pyramids. A lot of my travel agent partners are experts in this part of the world. Private arrangements can be put together for you, but you gotta go to the river. You really gotta go to the Nile. Once again, water giving life to everything that allows us to drink, to eat, to connect. Just love these rivers in the world. Yet not far away, the desert. I'm not going to lie, I've never been fond of a desert. I need water. Maybe that's why with all those 18 years on a cruise ship, if I spent too much time, I would jokingly say in the desert, I would worship a puddle at the end of a day. I really need to see water. This is St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Desert. If you go back and read your Bible about the burning bush and the Israelites being lost, This is the kind of sights and sounds that you'll find in the area of Egypt and over to Petra and into Israel as well. Lots of ships, cruise ships will go into Israel. Land tours can go into Israel. You may do 2 or 3 days. Jerusalem, into Palestinian occupied territories. Everything is done so smoothly. It's done so beautifully. I've never felt so safe any place as I did when I was in Israel, yet so mind-blowing for those that are Christian, for those that are not. I happened to be reading a Bible while I was there, and things that would blow my mind were seeing street signs that would say, Caesarea, exit here. And I would look down and see a Bible reference to the city of Caesarea, standing over Masada, and really trying to comprehend the history that's taken place in this part of the world. Little more exotics, over to China, seeing the Great Wall of China. I have not laid my eyes on it. Bhutan is on my list, as is Metoria in the northern end of Greece. If none of you have looked up or are familiar with many of the monasteries and Metoria in the northern end of Greece, it is really an extraordinary part of the world and likely worth a look-see. Down under in Australia, I've been there a number of times. I absolutely adore Sydney. Of course, going out to the outback, but so many Americans and Canadians misunderstand, misinterpret, whatever it is, the size of Australia. It is absolutely massive. It's planes, it's trains, it's automobiles, it's Sydney, Melbourne. It's also a place called Kangaroo Island. That's my nephew who lives in Adelaide. And this was on Kangaroo Island where we went to visit a year ago, last Christmas. Touring around the island on their car, going over by ferry. I saw a seaborne ship tied up there. Gin distilleries here, exquisite seafood and takeaway opportunities, camping, hotels, included on many, many of the guided vacation routes. And I would definitely go back to Kangaroo Island in a New York minute. But there is another place that bears attention in Australia, and it is the island of Tasmania. Only 500,000 people on the island, and this is out of the airplane window, actually leaving Tasmania. Lots of folks get into Hobart. They see Hobart. They are seeing a lot more cruise ships now than they ever did before. Yet there is so much more that exists beyond Hobart. There are these little, not little, massive parks and ways to access them with jeeps and camping and wineries and beaches. I predict that Tasmania is one of the most up and coming destinations for private arrangements, private homes, small B&Bs, wineries, going out to the beach, fishing, surfing. If you gaze over our heads and continue looking out at the ocean, the next piece of land that you will come in contact with is called the continent of Antarctica. Our world is so connected. To stand on a beach on the island of Tasmania, to gaze south, to frolic in the ocean, these are exquisite experiences. Things that can happen. There is a wombat. Her name was Diva, and she was being cared for by a local carer who was one of the neighbors. We got to know Diva kind of well. She ran into some difficulties. Her mama was killed. She was hand raised, and just about 3 weeks ago, Diva was released back out into the wild. But yeah, I just think Tasmania is probably one of the most exquisite places ever. Kia ora to New Zealand, Auckland, a place that feels like a city, but it's not a city if you are into sailing at all. The glowworms, the food, the restaurants, the southern end, Queenstown, and Milford Sound. Again, where cruise ships are going to come in. Activities abound here where you can do bungee jumping and the jet skiing and the jet boating and all of the action activities. And if you happen to find your way into Christchurch as they fumble their way back at a very highly successful rate from a very devastating earthquake, There's a neat place there called the Antarctic Experience in Christchurch. Christchurch is a jumping off point for a lot of military vessels and expeditions to the Antarctic, particularly for scientific purposes. There's a lot of military bases here. There's a lot of provisioning that's done here. And as a result of that, they have built a little, quote, attraction, unquote, beside it called the Antarctic Experience. And you can see what it's like. You can put on a jacket and experience the temperatures and see what the cats are like down there. And from a distance, see airplanes getting ready to go and be provisioned to go to the Antarctic. This is some pretty neat parts of the world. From New Zealand, let's jump to Central America, Guatemala, a wonderful place called Antigua in Guatemala. That is the view from my girlfriend's balcony of her home. She moved there 2 years ago out of Miami, packed up her house, her cats, sold her car, and is working remotely and just thriving. She teaches English. I've gone down to Guatemala to visit. One of our favorite experiences was on the chicken buses. And there's a great movie and story on Netflix about the chicken buses, how they Guatemalans come over the U.S. border to get the used school buses out of Texas and drive them back to Guatemala to be re-outfitted so that they can be used for public transportation here, because these school buses have outlived their life in the United States. They no more meet our standards. It's a food place, go to school place, study Spanish, go to the lake, look at flowers kind of place. And I went to Antigua recently and took a couple of days of Spanish lessons at one of the local Spanish schools. And these are some really great opportunities that are available to all of us. Getting involved in tourism activities, my friend Maureen is always involved in activities with the children, Niños del Guatemala, where she goes into the school and teaches, and we can get you into those kind of programs to do. That's what travel's all about. It's connecting with people in countries like Peru in the Andean mountains, gazing down into the sacred valley of Peru and leaning towards Machu Picchu. Remember, now you're in the Andean mountains. Cusco is actually at a higher altitude than Machu Picchu. So when you come down to Machu Picchu, you're actually going down from 9,000 feet into the Sacred Valley. The numbers now are capped as to how many folks can come in here, hike the Inca Trail or a segment of the Inca Trail. I've been here 3 or 4 times. Stay in Agua Caliente, the hotel at the top of the park as well. There's the one up at the top. These places are ever changing, ever significant, and there are so many experts in the field that can connect you with people, with food, with the markets, with the culture, with places like Buenos Aires in Argentina. I worked out of cruise ships sailing South America for such a long time, going here to not only see a tango performance, but perhaps even take some tango lessons. And Iguazu Falls. I was fortunate enough to have been able to have done a helicopter flight over the falls when those were being operated. But I always look at these falls, and I grew up at Niagara Falls. I have not yet been to Victoria Falls. That's on my to-do list. But I want to remind you how large South America is. We're looking now at Iguazu Falls, which is number 2 over there on the right-hand side. Rio de Janeiro, Buenos Aires, and I'm going to grab my little spotlight here. Rio, Iguazu, Buenos Aires. Once again, you must remember how large South America is, the distances to be flown, there's mountains to be traversed. From Buenos Aires coming to Lima in Peru, and yes, you can go out to the Galapagos Islands. You can include a lot of things in this part of the world, including the Peruvian Amazon. I don't like snakes. Never in a million years did I find or ever think I'd find myself walking in a rainforest wearing those black things on my legs. What are those? Those are called snake guards. Because in the upper part of the Peruvian Amazon from Iquitos, you can do a small riverboat cruise. When I worked with international expeditions, we specialized in this part of the world, in Peru, in the Galapagos Islands, and also in Africa. developed a massive passion for that. Combining this sort of sightseeing, this sort of animal focus with the Galapagos Islands. This archipelago, we've looked at it a few times this week. We have the United States military to thank for the airbase here, for the airport where we can fly in and out of on the small island of Baltra. Active volcanoes are still here. Lots of boats sailing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 night itineraries. Diving focuses now land and boating activities. So many different ways to experience these islands. I'm a purist. I love seeing these creatures, the blue-footed boobies, the marine iguanas, the land tortoises, and one of my favorites, the Galapagos penguins. And they are fascinating to me because, well, Humboldt Current brought them up from Antarctic. That's why the waters are so cold here. That's why they're so rich. And Mother Nature just never ceases to amaze me. Continuing opportunities in South America, and I've not met many people who've been to Easter Island, and I'm told it is well worth the journey. Rio de Janeiro and Corcovado, the bay that is so famous throughout the world. Oh, I love South America. In Brazil, of course, Portuguese is spoken. Such a wonderful experience, all of South America. And if you wonder why Portuguese is spoken in South America, take a look at your history. Take a look at the popes and what they did in South America. That'll be a nice little follow-up exercise. The last place I want to share with you was something I did last year in May. This was the 10-night experience I had to Tanzania in Africa. I used frequent flyer miles to travel from the United States on Dohor Airlines. It was fabulous in business class. Through Miami, through Dohor, down to Kilimanjaro. I had a 10-night itinerary, 1 night pre and 1 night post, and 9 of the most exquisite nights on a journey. So that's my journey to Africa. And so many people will say, when this time next year, where would you like to go? Africa would probably be on the top of my list. We've gone together on the rivers of Europe. Together, if you've joined me in our recent journey, we've gone to the continent of the Antarctic. We've touched on the Galapagos Islands and the simplicity and the beauty that exists here. The fascination in Venice, Italy, the challenges that face this city, plus the magnificence of Rome and Florence and some of the smaller things that exist, smaller places in Italy. The Panama Canal, I only talked about her history in a recent transit, not even touching on the magnificence of the new locks and the opportunities that there are there with the Panama Canal. And Ireland, the cliffs of Moher, this exquisitely beautiful country with Scotland and Wales a part of it. Ted took us up to Alaska. We dabbled a little bit in Europe, and we had a chance to take a peek at Africa together for a moment or two. And if you'd like to join me again, please do, because Scenes with Scenic is going to start on Monday, April 6th. I'd like to take 20 minutes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, beginning Monday, April 6th, to highlight some of the destinations, some of the sales techniques, some of the things that I think will be useful to you, my travel agent friends, as we go forward, as we all learn to travel, as we learn to live to travel, because that's what I'm here to do. That's what I want to continue to do. Thanks to all of you for joining me on our wonderful travel journeys. I'm not sure what the next dozen have in mind for us, but I'm hoping that you'll enjoy them. Thanks to everybody.